In the heart of Lagos, where the city pulsed with energy and chaos, there lived a man named Nosa. Now 35 years old, Nosa had once been a promising young architect whose designs graced the walls of prestigious firms. But life, as it always does, threw storms his way. 5 years ago, he suddenly lost the most important person in his life to a fatal motor accident. His mother was the only parent he had after his father walked away, abandoning them for his side chick when Nosa was only 5 years old. Mama Nosa had struggled day and night to make sure that Nosa went to school from elementary level all the way to college. It wasn't an easy journey. There were times when Gary was the only item on the menu for days. Through all this, Mama Nosa did not relent. She would usually say, "Nosa, my son, you will be a great man. Just stay focused and prayerful." After his NYSC, Nosa landed a six-figure job as an architect. He was very skilled in his craft, perhaps the best in the city. He made so much money that he was able to buy a beautiful 4-bedroom duplex and the latest Range Rover Sport. He asked his mother to move in with him, but she refused, preferring to stay in their one-room apartment in Ajegunle. After much persuasion, she finally agreed. She gifted everything in her one room to the neighbors, as Nosa had insisted he did not want anything from that room to move in with her. She was in a taxi on her way to Nosa's new house when tragedy struck. A reckless trailer driver ran into them, and both Nosa's mom and the taxi driver died on the spot. There was no words to describe the pain Nosa felt. He blamed himself for his mother's death. If only he had cancelled his meeting and got to pick her up by himself, his mother would still be alive. Nosa became a shadow of himself, crying endlessly. After the burial, Nosa would go to his mother's grave. Every weekend, he would stay there for hours, talking to her and telling her how his life felt empty without her. On one of these visits, he noticed a striking young woman who introduced herself as Mandy. Her presence felt oddly comforting amidst his grief. She had lost her mother to a long battle with cancer, and like Nosa, she was grieving. Mandy had an air of misery. They bonded quickly over shared stories of loss. She offered to accompany him for a drink that day, and Nosa, yearning for companionship, agreed. That night marked the beginning of their relationship. Mandy's world was vastly different from Nosa's. She introduced him to nightclubs, parties, and a fast-paced lifestyle. At first, it was thrilling, a distraction from his pain, but things soon took a different turn. One fateful evening, Mandy offered Nosa a small pill, promising it would ease his sorrow. Reluctantly, he accepted. The euphoria was immediate, and for the first time since his mother's death, he felt alive. What began as occasional use escalated quickly. Mandy introduced Nosa to stronger substances. His life started to revolve around drugs, and his career as a budding architect began to nosedive. Nosa's friends noticed the changes and they tried to intervene. They reminded him of his mother's dreams for him, but he dismissed their concerns, convinced he had everything under control. Mandy's past surfaced in bits and pieces. She had been using drugs long before meeting Nosa, trying to escape her own traumas. Together, they became enablers, feeding each other's addiction. Nosa's finances started to dwindle. He started selling his possessions to fund their habit. With time, his performance at work dropped so bad the company had no choice but to fire him. He sold his 4-bedroom duplex and moved into an apartment with Mandy. Over time, their arguments became frequent, fueled by paranoia and desperation. One night, Mandy overdosed in their shared apartment. Nosa found her unconscious and rushed her to the hospital. She survived but refused to seek help, convincing Nosa it was a one-time mistake. Nosa knew it was time to quit this lifestyle, but he lacked the willpower. Months later, Mandy overdosed again. This time, she didn't make it. Her death shattered Nosa. He blamed himself for not saving her, and he sank deeper into addiction. His once bright future had gone dim. His body became weak, his skin shallow, and his eyes hollow. He lost his job, his friends, his self-respect. He moved into a dilapidated one-room apartment in Ajegunle, surviving by odd jobs and handouts. His addiction consumed every naira he earned, leaving him trapped in a vicious circle of poverty and despair. Amid his struggles, Nosa received an unexpected visitor. His father, who had walked out of his life 3 decades earlier. Now an older man with a stooped posture and a face lined with regret, he approached Nosa's apartment hesitantly. He too had suffered his own misfortunes. After leaving Nosa and his mother, his relationship with the woman he left them for ended disastrously. He had spent years drifting, trying to build a new life, but he was haunted by the family he had abandoned. "I heard about your mother's passing," Charles began, standing awkwardly at Nosa's door. "I've been looking for you ever since. I want to make things right." Nosa stared at him, anger bubbling to the surface. "You want to make this right? Now? After all these years? After abandoning us?" Charles lowered his head. "I was a fool, Nosa. I can't undo the past, but I want to help you now. If you let me." Nosa slammed the door, unwilling to hear anymore. If you have enjoyed this video so far, do not forget to give us a thumbs up, drop a comment, subscribe, and share the story. Now, let's go back to the story. One rainy evening, as Nosa sat in the corner near the bustling market, shivering from withdrawal symptoms, a small hand tugged at his sleeve. He turned to see a young girl, no older than 10, with bright, curious eyes and a determined expression. "Uncle, wetin dey do you?" she asked in pidgin English. Nosa, startled by her boldness, waved her off. "Go home, little one. This is no place for you." But the girl named Zina didn't leave. She handed him a small piece of agege bread and sat beside him, her tiny umbrella barely shielding her from the rain. "You look hungry. Oya, eat bread." Nosa hesitated, but then he took the bread. It was the first meal he had in days. Zina told him she lived nearby with her grandmother, Mama Alero, who ran a small kiosk selling akara and pap. Her father had died in a construction accident and her mother had disappeared years ago. Despite her hardships, Zina exuded a resilience that both baffled and inspired Nosa. The next day, Zina returned with a steaming bowl of pap and akara. Slowly, her visits became regular. She introduced him to her grandmother, who welcomed him warmly, feeding him a hearty meal and speaking to him about faith, redemption, and the power of community. Mama Alero soon became like a mother to Nosa. Whenever she saw him trying to buy drugs, she would scold him and say, "My son, you are better than this." It wasn't easy, but with Mama Alero and Zina's support, Nosa decided to change. He joined a local rehabilitation program run by a church. The journey was grueling. Withdrawal tested every ounce of his willpower, but each time he felt like giving up, Zina would appear, sometimes with a hand-drawn picture of him standing tall and strong, other times with a joke to lighten his mood. Charles also did not give up. He kept returning, leaving small packages of food and handwritten notes at Nosa's door. The notes spoke of his regret, his shame, and his hope that Nosa could find it in his heart to forgive him. As Nosa embarked on his journey to rehabilitation, he began to read the notes. Slowly, he allowed Charles into his life. They began meeting at a nearby park, where Charles would share stories of his failures and the lessons he had learned. For the first time, Nosa saw his father as a flawed human rather than the villain of his childhood. With the support of Zina, Mama Alero, and now his father, Nosa found the strength to move forward. He invited Charles to one of his therapy sessions where they confronted the pain of the past together. It was a raw and emotional experience, but it marked a turning point in their relationship. Months passed, and Nosa began to rebuild his life. He volunteered at the rehab center, sharing his story to inspire others. Slowly, his creative spark returned. He started sketching designs again, eventually landing a job with a small construction company. One day, Nosa surprised Zina and Mama Alero by renovating their kiosk, transforming it into a study structure with colorful signage that read, "Mama Alero's Akara Spots." It became a bustling hub in the community, and Nosa often stopped by to help. Years later, as Nosa stood at the grand opening of a community center he had designed to support at-risk youths, he spotted Zina in the crowd, now a teenager, beaming with pride. She had been his unexpected source of love, his anchor in a stormy sea. Nosa took the microphone and said, "If you ever doubt the power of love and kindness, remember this: even in the darkest shadows, sunlight can find its way in." For me, that sunlight was a little girl named Zina. The crowd erupted in applause, and Nosa knew that he had not only rebuilt his life, but also found a new purpose: to be the sunlight for others, just as Zina had been for him.